So, what are the deepest wounds and fears that a fearful avoidant attachment style has when it comes to connection and relationships? There are unfortunately quite a few. And this is the result of going through a lot of trauma, whether it's consistent small t trauma over time or medium t trauma, or a couple of really serious acute big T trauma types of events. And not only does not understanding these types of events and how they impact your subconscious mind and thus future relationships end up acting as a barrier to real connection, but it also ends up causing you to be in a splintered place in the relationship to yourself. So in today's video, I want to take you through one of the most important topics, which is what are the biggest wounds of the fearful avoidant attachment style? How are these wounds acting as barriers to connection? And how can we actually change these things so that your past does not have to keep defining your present and future relationships? So what I want to take you through here today is not just the understanding of what your baggage is in relationships, but also where it comes from, why it happens. And most importantly, I'm going to take you through 3 really important questions towards the end of this video that will help you probably have some huge insights about how much you may actually be dragging these things along and how much you may actually be doing these things in hidden forms in your own life without recognizing. And then we'll talk about how you can change. If you're new to this channel, my name is Gibson, and I put daily videos here all about the subconscious mind, how we can rewire using neuroscience, and I talk a lot about relationships, attachment styles, and how we can really build the best relationships of our life. So please subscribe if you don't want to miss any of our daily content. So first and foremost, I want you to understand a little something about the concept or idea of core wounds if you are a fearful avoidant, or if you're the loved one of a fearful avoidant who's trying to better understand this person in your life. And the first really important idea to recognize is that core wounds, basically as an analogy, are almost like, imagine you go into the forest tomorrow and you see a bear and you run away from the bear and you get away and you're safe, thank goodness. But then the very next day you have to go back into the same forest. What would your mind do? Well, your mind would look out for the bear everywhere. It would look around every tree and around every corner, and it would be nervous. It would go, where's the bear? Is the bear coming? And what happens is our mind is wired to hang on to negative, threatening, or scary experiences and really hold on tight. In other words, what really happens is our subconscious mind gets imprinted with these acutely emotional experiences. And then because our subconscious mind is really the lens that we see and interact with the world through, we then project the chances out onto everything of seeing that bear again. We project if we felt abandoned in childhood that we're going to get abandoned as an adult. If we felt betrayed in childhood, we project the likelihood of betrayal as an adult. And so what is unresolved from the past that was a threatening experience, we store and we basically interact with our world through the greater likelihood of those things happening again. You even see this with dismissive avoidant attachment styles, right? They end up thinking, okay, I felt engulfed or trapped in childhood, and so I'm going to feel trapped as an adult. So we're all what I call re-projecting the past onto our present and future experiences. And this is also when you hear the term relationship baggage, what it actually is. I mean, our baggage is just these unresolved, stored experiences that hurt us in the past that our subconscious mind is literally wired to hang on to as a means for self-protection. But does this mean that you're stuck with your relationship baggage all the time? And if you're a fearful avoidant listening to this, what is your relationship baggage more specifically? Well, that's what I'm going to unpack next. So first and foremost, you are absolutely not stuck with your relationship baggage. You're not born with core wounds or these big relationship fears, but they get conditioned into you. And so we can leverage our understanding of conditioning and how the subconscious mind works, how it acquires neural networks and different conditions to actually rewire these things. We talk about this a ton on this channel, but I want to start by just defining what big pieces of baggage you may actually be carrying if in fact you are a fearful avoidant attachment style. And then of course, if you're the loved one of a fearful avoidant, hopefully this can help you really understand your partner or friend or whoever the fearful avoidant is in your life. So one of the first things is a lot of fearful avoidants go through a lot of chaos in childhood. And usually this chaos involves 3 crucial pillars. This chaos involves times where there's a disconnect and this acute fear of abandonment. This isn't necessarily just like physical abandonment, like a parent leaving, but it can be that, for example, when a parent drinks, they become emotionally disconnected. And there feels like there's this deep emotional abandonment if your parent's an alcoholic. Or same thing would go if a parent's using substances, or if a parent, becomes sort of like the worst version of themselves when they're in the big fight with another parent, and you feel like you can't connect to either parent in a healthy way, another form of emotional abandonment. I mean, there's lots of different types of examples of this, but you'll see these acute forms of abandonment. And so a lot of fearful avoidants will have this fear of that happening, fear of emotional disconnect or deep abandonment occurring in the relationship between themselves and somebody else. On the flip side of this, you'll also see this fear of being trapped or helpless, because a lot of fearful avoidants grow up again with a lot of chaos in their home because a parent's an alcoholic, or a parent has a personality disorder, or a parent, there's a lot of parentification perhaps, where a child's in the middle of a lot of really intense circumstances growing up. And so they'll often feel in these different types of circumstances that while they don't want abandonment and they do want that closeness, closeness is also unpredictable and sometimes terrifying. Closeness can be something that feels engulfing or trapping or leaves them feeling helpless or more confused. And so on the other side, there's this sort of dynamic of feeling like I'm scared of closeness and connection at the same time. And so this is often like a trapped piece of baggage, or a core wound, or if you're being helpless, if you let your guard down or do try to rely on somebody. And then we also have this really strong pillar of the fear of betrayal, because if somebody's constantly changing how they are in their environment, if you have a parent who one day is drinking and they're kind, and another day is drinking and they're angry, or another day is drinking and they're actually in a good mood. It's almost like you just never know what you're going to get. And so as a child, what this child learns in order to adapt to their environment and learn to attach to their caregivers at all is I have to be extremely hypervigilant. And so they look really deeply into, incongruencies. If somebody's stories change or facial expressions change or something's off, they're just so fast to notice it and pick up on it because they have a history of never knowing what they're going to get. In other words, they can't trust their caregivers to be consistent, congruent, stable. And so it creates these other pieces of baggage really around betrayal trauma and feelings of unsafety and deep closeness. And so there are other core wounds that fearful avoidants have. Other big sensitive spots are things like feeling unimportant or unseen, or feeling like they're bad because they're punished for unpredictable things sometimes growing up. I've seen fearful avoidants be punished for laughing too loud. It's almost like their caregivers are more taking out their anger on the child than they are actually trying to teach the child with consequences to their actions. And this can absolutely create a big I am bad core wound. But the main ones that you'll see that just tend to be the strongest are the abandonment, the betrayal, the emotionally unsafe, the trapped, the helpless. These are all things that will cause a fearful avoidant to want closeness, but be terrified of it at the same time. And so I want to ask you, if you are a fearful avoidant listening to this, do you recognize yourself in these patterns? Where did these things come from in your relationships growing up? And it's actually a great moment to pause the video and just self-reflect for a moment to start putting some of those pieces together. Because sometimes what we don't realize is how much our relationships truly are being dictated by our past, because our subconscious mind it's still carrying those wounds in the present, right? A lot of people often ask me, Thais, how am I carrying my past around from 40 years ago? And it's like, well, because those wounds, those fears, those ideas are still present in your subconscious mind currently. And so when we look at these different things, I want you to ask yourself a next question. I'm going to take you through two other questions here in this video just to help you see some of the impact. What is it costing you to carry these core wounds in your life? What is it costing you to go through relationship after relationship, constantly fearing being abandoned or trapped or betrayed, or to feel emotionally unsafe in relationships when you get vulnerable or when you rely on people? Like, what is it actually costing you? And a lot of times you'll see that these wounds are keeping you isolated. They're stopping you from like letting people in. They're stopping you from letting you rely on other people or ask for help or support. You may even find yourself, when you think of asking for help and support, feeling afraid, feeling, scared that you're being weak, or judging yourself for that in some sort of way. when in natural human relationships, there tends to be this deep sense of reciprocity. We're supposed to rely on each other in healthy, interdependent ways. And the last thing, before I get into the third major question that I just want to take you through here, I want to let you know if you're somebody who has these core wounds and you're sick and tired of them and you actually want to do some work and rewire them, I have a course you can check out fully for free for 14 days. It's more than enough time to get through this course. And it's called the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. It's all about how your subconscious mind works, how these wounds came about, how to refire and wire new neural pathways over time. And it takes about 21 days for 2 to 3 minutes a day to actually rewire and recondition these things. And you can do this in a way that doesn't stop you from being cautious or conscientious in relationships. Because I know sometimes fearful avoidants think if I drop my guard and I'm too trusting, then I'll be hurt or I'll be betrayed further. But there's actual tools for helping you make sure that doesn't happen while also being able to rewire these things. And then the last thing, okay, and this is one of the most important, and by the way, I'll put the link to that in the description down below. But the last thing I really want to ask you, and I think this is one of the most important components about when we really take a look at our core wounds and the relationship baggage we have, is that when we take our past into our present, when it becomes a part of how we were conditioned because of the things that happened to us, what ends up taking place is your subconscious mind forms its comfort zone. Like it's used to behaving this way. It gets used to fearing and thinking about these things. And in a way, at worst, as a result, you become these things in the relationship to yourself. Because again, they're your conditioning, they're your patterning. And what I mean by this is usually fearful avoidance, for example, even though they're so scared of being abandoned by others, they're often the first to abandon themselves to be there for others. You know, it's almost like fearful avoidants can weaponize their empathy against themselves and run themselves into the ground to try to show up for somebody else, you know, because they have these deep conditioned patterns. Another thing is fearful avoidants often betray themselves. They often say yes when they mean no, or they don't set their boundaries, or they don't follow through on communicating their needs, or, you know, take their feelings into consideration as much as they're considering other people's feelings. Fearful avoidants may trap themselves by things like overcommitting, by putting too much on their plate, putting themselves under too much pressure, having too high of expectations of themselves. So what's crazy about this is these pieces of baggage, they're not just things that we fear from others because they happened to us in the past. They're things that we are actively doing in the relationship to ourselves. And I want to ask you, what is one thing that you can commit to stop doing that today? Okay, because if you can take one small thing away from this and take action, and that could be reprogramming and doing that free course while it's available. But one thing that you can do today may even be set a boundary every day, or listen to my feelings more, or take myself equally into consideration as I do others. But knowing these things will really help you build momentum in a new form. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to this channel and please check out that course. It's a really supportive resource. It's literally free for 14 days, more than enough time to get through the course. I'm really hoping it will help you on your journey. And thank you so much for stopping by.